What if the deepest parts of our world hold not just secrets, but a living debt? What if humanity's insatiable hunger for discovery awakened something ancient, something that now demands a terrible generational price? In the cold, salt-worn embrace of coastal Maine stands a house. Not just any house, but a sentinel to a story, whispered only in the shadows of the blighted peninsula it guards. This is the ancestral home of the Blackburns, a name now synonymous with a haunting legacy, a hydrobiological curse passed down through generations. A curse not of myth, but of tangible, terrifying reality, meticulously documented, yet deliberately obscured from public knowledge. The origin of their torment lies thousands of miles away, beneath the crushing weight of the Pacific, in the deepest scar on Earth's face, the Mariana Trench. Decades ago, the family patriarch, a man driven by a thirst for the ultimate unknown, ventured into that abyssal void. He sought answers, perhaps even glory, but what he found was something far more profound and infinitely more perilous. A forgotten relic of a submerged civilization and its silent, abyssal guardian. What he unearthed was not merely an object, but a reawakening. A malevolent intelligence, dormant for millennia in the primordial darkness, stirred, and its hunger, once sated, now demanded a new tribute. The Blackburns became its conduit, its inheritors. Their burden is not a cosmic threat from the stars, but a terrestrial horror of unimaginable antiquity, rooted in the very core of our planet. A living entity, woven into their very genetic code, gnawing at their sanity, twisting their flesh. For generations, this curse was a creeping dread, a shadow in their lineage. But then, the whispers solidified into screams. The youngest Blackburn, a brilliant marine biologist, vanished without a trace from her research vessel near a newly discovered anomaly in the Pacific. Her final log entries, fragmented and chilling, spoke of a colossal, non-Euclidean structure emerging from the abyssal plain. And then, a sound, an ancient hymn reverberating through her hydrophones. A song of pure, unadulterated antiquity. The ocean was calling, and the Blackburns were its chosen. Her disappearance was not an isolated incident. It was the final, undeniable proof that the past was not just history. It was a living, breathing predator, resurfacing to claim them one by one. The journals of their patriarch, long forbidden, now became their only hope, their chilling guide into an unraveling they could no longer outrun. Are you ready to dive with us into this unexplored abyssal world where the boundaries of science and sanity blur, and the price of knowledge is paid in blood? The world of the Blackburns, steeped in a fog of ancient dread, seems antithetical to the precision of modern science. Yet, it is within this very paradox that our journey deepens. For among their dwindling line stood a mind fiercely devoted to the empirical, a beacon of logic against the encroaching shadows of family lore. Her name was Dr. Eleanor Blackburn, the youngest and arguably the most brilliant of her generation, a marine biologist whose gaze was fixed not on the past, but on the future of oceanic discovery. Eleanor was a product of the finest American institutions, her intellect honed by years at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography. Her name whispered with respect in the hallowed halls of Woods Hole. Her specialty lay in the elusive hydrodynamics of abyssal trenches, the very crushing depths that haunted her family's legacy. Unlike her ancestors who spoke in riddles of curses and pacts, Eleanor spoke in charts, in sonograms, in precise measurements of temperature gradients and hydrostatic pressure. For her, the ocean was not a realm of spirits, but a vast, complex machine waiting to yield its secrets to the right equation. Her approach was one of meticulous, almost relentless skepticism. Every anomaly was a data point to be explained. Every strange echo on a sonar screen a phenomenon awaiting a verifiable cause. She dismissed the family's affliction as a peculiar form of inherited psychosis, perhaps a manifestation of profound grief or a rare genetic predisposition to neurological decay, never a supernatural force. Her notebooks were filled not with desperate pleas, but with hypotheses, counter-hypotheses, and exhaustive plans for observation and experimentation. She believed that even the most bizarre occurrences had a scientific explanation, if only one possessed the right tools and the unwavering commitment to find it. Eleanor's early work focused on deciphering the cryptic movements of deep-sea currents, analyzing how the colossal gyres sculpted the unseen topography of the ocean floor, influencing the distribution of life in zones once thought barren. She pored over decades of American oceanographic survey data, looking for subtle shifts, for patterns that might indicate unseen geological activity or the presence of undocumented life forms. Her research was rigorous, published in prestigious journals, challenging established paradigms with nothing but irrefutable evidence. She was a scientist through and through, her mind a fortress against the irrational. It was this very scientific foundation, this unshakable belief in the observable and the measurable, that made her eventual encounter with the unexplainable so profoundly unsettling. She sought the truth not in ancient texts or whispered legends, but in the cold, hard data of the deep. What happens when the data itself begins to defy every known law of physics, every accepted principle of biology? What happens when the very depths she sought to illuminate with the light of science instead engulf her in a darkness that refuses to be categorized? This unyielding pursuit of empirical truth would lead her not just to the brink of a new discovery, but to the very edge of the abyssal plane of human comprehension. Are some truths too profound, too ancient, to be confined within the neat parameters of scientific explanation? The pervasive melancholia that clings to the Blackburn ancestral home, a salt-worn sentinel on Maine's blighted coast, finds its genesis not in the mists of folklore, but in the very real, very tangible depths of the Pacific. It was there, in the crushing blackness of the Mariana Trench, that Elias Blackburn, the family's patriarch, and a figure of both brilliance and tragic hubris, dared to venture. Decades ago, driven by an insatiable curiosity and a profound belief in the ocean's untold secrets, Elias helmed an expedition that would not merely push the boundaries of hydrobiological science, but shatter the very fabric of his family's future. His vessel, the Leviathan's Kiss, was a marvel of its time, a steel cocoon designed to withstand pressures that could pulverize diamonds. Elias sought geological anomalies, unique hydrothermal vents, perhaps even undiscovered chemosynthetic ecosystems. What he found, however, defied every textbook, every hypothesis, every rational expectation. Deep within a newly charted anoxic basin where light had never touched for millions of years, his sonar picked up an impossible signature, a structure vast and geometrically improbable, unlike anything formed in natural processes. It was a ruin, or perhaps a monument, crafted by an intelligence humanity had never dreamed existed. As the Leviathan's Kiss cautiously approached, its external lights cut through the perpetual night, revealing facets that absorbed light rather than reflected it, surfaces that seemed to bend the very space around them. And there, amidst the cyclopean architecture, Elias's manipulator arm recovered it, a relic. It was not stone, nor metal as we know it, but a swirling obsidian vortex, humming with a low, resonant frequency that permeated the submersible's hull. Vibrating through bone and sinew, this object was undeniably artificial, yet felt profoundly organic, as if it had grown from the abyssal darkness itself. The moment the relic was brought aboard, a profound shift occurred. Not in the physical world, but within Elias himself. The crew reported a chilling silence descending upon the vessel, an absence of the usual mechanical hum, replaced by an inaudible pressure that weighed on their minds. Elias, once vibrant and fiercely logical, became withdrawn, his eyes haunted, his sleep plagued by nightmares that echoed with an ancient, haunting hymn, a melody described as both beautiful and utterly alien. He knew, with a horrifying certainty, that he had disturbed something immense, something that had slept for eons in the Earth's deepest wound. Upon his return, the relic, meticulously documented, yet never truly understood, was secreted away, a forbidden artifact. But its influence had already begun to spread, a slow, insidious poison seeping into the Blackburn lineage. Elias's health deteriorated rapidly, marked by a strange, unidentifiable wasting and a growing fixation on the sea, an obsession that bordered on madness. He spoke of whispers from the deep, of a hunger that stretched across time, demanding recompense for what he had stolen. The relic was not merely an object, it was a connection, a conduit, and its awakening had re-established an ancient, terrible pact. This was the true genesis of the Blackburn curse. Not a random misfortune, but a direct consequence of a profound violation. The artifact Elias brought back was not inert. It was alive. A dormant piece of a malevolent intelligence, now stirring, its ancient hunger reawakened. And it was through this relic, through the very bloodline that had touched it, that the abyssal guardian would reclaim its due. The initial price was paid in Elias's sanity and life, but the debt, carved into the Blackburn genetic code, was far from settled. Are you ready to uncover the terrifying scope of this inherited horror? This living entity resurfacing to claim them one by one. The inherited burden was not an immediate cataclysmic event, but a slow, insidious seep into the foundations of the Blackburn legacy. For generations following the patriarch's fateful return from the abyss, the sprawling manor, once a proud testament to New England maritime prowess, became less a home and more a mausoleum of quiet dread. Its salt-worn timbers seemed to groan not just with age, but with a palpable weight, a suffocating presence that pressed in from the perpetually gray sea. The air, thick with brine and decay, often carried a scent alien to mere ocean air, something metallic, sulfuric, a faint echo of primordial depths. It began subtly, an insidious unraveling, not immediately attributed to the trench. The family, always reclusive, became more so, their intellectual pursuits a fragile shield against an encroaching malaise. They dismissed it as the melancholic temperament of scholars, the weariness of a line devoted to the unfathomable. Yet, the anomalies persisted, whispered from one generation to the next, like a dark lullaby. Children spoke of shapes shifting in the fog that clung to the blighted peninsula, forms that moved with an unnatural fluidity, just beyond the edge of peripheral vision. Fishermen daring not driftwood, nor common wreckage. These were odd, barnacle-encrusted forms, some with geometries that defied terrestrial understanding, others with an unnerving, organic smoothness, unlike any known rock or shell. The Blackburns, in their academic curiosity, initially catalogued them, their precise hands noting the strange molecular density, the faint luminescence that sometimes pulsed in the dead of night. But their studies never yielded answers, only deeper questions, and a growing, unsettling certainty that these were not random flotsam, but messengers from an impossible place. One particularly grim winter, the eldest Blackburn daughter, a budding naturalist, began to suffer from a peculiar ailment. Not a fever, nor a cough, but a profound, debilitating despondency, accompanied by vivid, waking hallucinations. She spoke of seeing shimmering, translucent currents coiling in the corners of her ancestral study, of hearing a faint, disharmonious chorus echoing from the deepest parts of the house, a song not of this world, yet undeniably close. Her descriptions were dismissed as the ravings of a fragile mind, a consequence of the isolation. But her affliction mirrored a forgotten entry in an old family diary, speaking of a similar seasickness of the soul that had plagued her great-aunt decades prior. Could it be that the abyss had not merely left a physical relic, but an indelible mark upon the very psyche of the Blackburn lineage? This creeping decay, this erosion of the known world, was not confined to the mind. The family found themselves increasingly susceptible to respiratory ailments, a strange pallor to their skin, a chilling sensation of cold deep in their bones, even in summer. The subtle manifestation of an inheritable blight, mirroring the crushing pressure of the deep. What dark energies had been unleashed, and how deeply had they truly permeated the world above? The Blackburn family's descent into a chilling legacy began not with a whisper, but with the roar of subaquatic engines decades ago, as Alistair Blackburn, a man of formidable intellect and even more formidable ambition, charted a course for the deepest scar on Earth's surface, the Mariana Trench. He was not merely an explorer, he was a pioneer, driven by a thirst to pierce the veil of the unknown, to gaze upon creation's most remote and forbidden chambers. His vessel, a marvel of human ingenuity against unimaginable pressure, was a needle threading through liquid night, a solitary beacon in a world untouched since the dawn of time. It was amidst this crushing, absolute darkness that his sonar painted an impossible anomaly, not a hydrothermal vent, not a geological formation, but something structured, a symmetry that spoke of design, of intention, utterly alien to the chaotic genesis of the abyssal plane. What followed was an agonizingly slow, almost reverent descent, each meter deeper bringing a new, profound sense of dread and exhilarating discovery. The pressure outside threatened to crush their very atoms, yet inside, a different kind of pressure began to build, the weight of an ancient secret poised for revelation. When their lights finally pierced the perpetual twilight of the deepest abyss, they illuminated not a landscape of barren rock, but the impossible, colossal, non-Euclidean angles rising from the sea floor. Structures that defied terrestrial geometry, crafted from an unknown, obsidian-like material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, hinting at a civilization lost not merely to time, but to a different dimension of understanding. And at the heart of this impossible architecture, pulsating with a faint internal luminescence, lay the artifact. It was not mere stone, nor metal, but something that hummed with a resonance beyond human comprehension, a nexus of forgotten power. Alistair, despite the terror and wonder, recognized it for what it was: a key, a relic of a primordial age, a fragment of a truth humanity was never meant to witness. He brought it aboard, against the desperate pleas of his crew, claiming it as the greatest discovery in human history. But with its retrieval, something else ascended from the depths. A silent, unseen wave of influence. The very air within the submersible seemed to thicken, the light dim, and the dreams of the crew turned to visions of drowning, of ancient hymns echoing in black water. Alistair himself, once so stoic, began to change, his eyes reflecting a profound, unnatural lucidity intertwined with a chilling madness. The relic, now a silent passenger, brought with it an insatiable hunger, a demand for reawakening. Its presence within the Blackburn household, carried from that abyssal tomb, began to subtly warp the fabric of reality around them, a festering wound in their ancestral line. Was it the artifact itself, or the ancient entity it guarded, now stirred from its aeons-long slumber, that began to twist the very DNA of the Blackburns, setting in motion a horror that would span generations? And what terrible price had Alistair truly agreed to pay for his singular moment of forbidden discovery? The abyssal echo of that choice reverberates still. The shadows within the Blackburn Manor grew long. But it was not merely the failing light of the blighted Maine coast that deepened them. Beyond whispered anxieties and the patriarch's cryptic records, the curse began to unfurl its chilling tapestry. It started subtly, a pervasive cold no hearth fire could dispel, settling deep within the manor and its inhabitants. A chill from something ancient, internal. Then came the sounds, faint, like distant water struggling through a constricted pipe, growing into an echoing thrum from the earth beneath. The youngest Blackburn's log entries spoke of an ancient hymn. Now, that non-human melody drifted on the sea mist, sometimes a vibration in the chest, a deep hum resonating with their marrow. Their skin took on a peculiar translucence, a pallor of fundamental alteration. Their eyes, once bright with academic fire, now held an abyssal gleam. As if gazing into crushing darkness, the air within thickened, heavy with brine, decay, a faint metallic tang utterly alien. The sea, too, responded. The gray waters of the inlet grew agitated, not with storm's rage, but a viscous churn, as if an immense, unseen body writhed beneath. Unidentifiable, barnacle-encrusted fragments, once curiosities, now appeared in alarming profusion, some pulsating faintly with inner light, others covered in geometric patterns, defying natural formation, whispering of things dragged from unimaginable depths. The visions began, not as fleeting shadows, but fully formed assaults on their waking minds. The deceased patriarch materialized in salt-worn corridors, face contorted in silent horror, pointing towards the locked study. Non-Euclidean structures distorted the walls, twisting perspectives until sanity frayed. They felt the abyss's crushing pressure, a physical weight on their chests, stealing breath, a chilling echo of unfathomable depths. Your reclusiveness intensified, born of horrifying necessity. The outside world offered no solace, only painful contrast. Amidst this escalating madness, the family unearthed more than forbidden journals. They found sealed letters within a false bottom of their Patriarch sea chest, alongside sea. These letters, dated years after his return, detailed desperate measures to ward off an encroaching darkness. He spoke of a specific date, a confluence of astronomical, oceanic tides, when the threshold would weaken. His scientific mind, in its final throes, attempted to quantify the impossible, detailing the curse's symptoms, the cold, the sounds, the visions, with chilling precision mirroring their unfolding reality. He called it the abyssal reaching. But the true horror wasn't just shared madness. It was the chilling realization that the darkness he sought to contain was not abstract, but something that had truly begun to stir, reaching out from the abyssal void, not for his soul alone, but for his entire bloodline. As the fog rolled in thicker than ever one night, muffling the world beyond, a new, distinct sound emerged from the churning waters of the inlet. A sound not of the natural world, but of something immense, ancient, finally breaking free. Was it the abyssal guardian, or merely the harbinger of an even greater terror, now irrevocably drawn to their cursed lineage, its hunger reawakened? The dusty bindings of Elias Blackburn's journals offered no comfort. Only the chilling promise of answers they might not survive to fully comprehend. Within their brittle pages, meticulously kept, lay not just the record of a scientific endeavor, but a slow descent into terror, a creeping realization that humanity had strayed into realms best left undisturbed. His initial entries, filled with the sterile precision of a geographer, spoke of seismic anomalies in the Mariana Trench, of sonar readings that defied known geological formations. He described the immense, crushing darkness as a living entity, an ancient mind pressing down on the submersible's hull, not just water, but a palpable, intelligent force, a pressure that sought to infiltrate. But it was the later logs, penned with a trembling hand, that truly unraveled the tapestry of the family's torment. Elias spoke of an impossible resonance, a vibration that permeated the very molecular structure of the deep, a sound beyond human hearing, yet deeply felt, a primal hum that suggested vast, hidden chambers beneath the trench floor. He began to illustrate strange, swirling glyphs, unlike any known script, fragments he claimed to have seen etched into colossal, obsidian-like outcroppings glimpsed through the deep-sea lights. These weren't geological faults. They were structures, not formed by nature, but built by an unimaginable intelligence. A civilization not just lost, but actively concealed, thriving in perpetual night, guarded by something of immense, abyssal power. His detailed diagrams of a strange, crystalline artifact recovered from a fissure near these anomalies were particularly disturbing. It pulsed, he wrote, with a cold internal light, and its touch brought visions of unspeakable scale, Cyclopean cities, towering spires of dark matter, and shadows that moved with the fluid grace of the abyss itself. This artifact, he theorized, was not merely an object, but a key, a conduit, perhaps even a fragment of the entity itself, dormant yet waiting. It was after its retrieval that the first changes began, subtle at first, a persistent chill, a creeping numbness in his extremities, a profound, unshakable sense of being watched, even in the vast isolation of the ocean. The journal entries meticulously detail his growing horror, describing a pervasive, briny taste in his mouth, a faint phosphorescence sometimes visible on his skin, a deepening sensitivity to light, and an increasing difficulty in breathing the air of the surface world. This wasn't merely a haunting. It was a profound, inheritable symbiosis gone catastrophically wrong. The family home, the decrepit manor in Maine, became a crucible for this transformation, its salt-laden air a constant reminder of the ocean's relentless claim. But as the pages faded, the true questions emerged. What specific role did this unearthed artifact play in the reawakening of this ancient hunger? And what unspeakable truth did the patriarch discover that directly linked their bloodline to this abyssal entity, ensuring the curse would follow them through generations? The cracked leather journals of Silas Blackburn, meticulously preserved in a climate-controlled vault beneath the manor's decaying library, exhaled the stale scent of forgotten depths and obsession. Each page, adorned with frantic sketches and maddeningly precise nautical charts, spoke of a mind unmoored, not by the crushing pressure of the abyssal plain, but by something far more insidious. Within their brittle pages, the remaining Blackburns, the stoic Eleanor and her brother Thomas, discovered not just a historical record, but a living testament to their patriarch's unraveling. Silas had not merely observed, he had interacted. He described a resonance, a song of the deep that permeated his very being after his final, ill-fated dive. He chronicled the subtle shifts, the unnatural clarity of his dreams, the chilling whispers that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the manor, the growing compulsion to return to the blackness. But it was a single entry, dated years after his return, that truly froze their blood. Scrawled in a hand far shakier than the preceding text, it spoke of the transference of a genetic imprint, a gift from the abyss that had been bestowed upon his lineage. He detailed inexplicable somatic changes, a faint, iridescent sheen on his skin under certain lights, a growing sensitivity to the ocean's tides, a primal hunger that gnawed at his core. He wrote of his children, his legacy, carrying this burden unknowingly, a ticking mechanism within their very blood. Could this be the explanation for the increasingly bizarre health issues plaguing their family line? The inexplicable wasting diseases? The sudden onset of profound psychological torments that defied diagnosis. As Eleanor traced the frantic lines with a trembling finger, a sudden, piercing headache erupted behind her eyes. It was not a typical migraine. This was a pressure, a soundless scream resonating deep within her skull, accompanied by a horrifying, fleeting vision. A vast, cyclopean eye, ancient beyond measure, staring back from an inky void. Thomas, witnessing his sister's sudden agony, felt a cold dread deeper than the trench itself. He too had begun to experience the whispers, faint at first, then growing in intensity, weaving themselves into the moan of the foghorn, the grind of the tide against the rocks outside. He'd found himself drawn inexplicably to the derelict docks, his gaze fixed on the churning gray waters, a profound sense of longing mixed with terror consuming him. The Blackburns were not merely inheriting a curse, they were actively becoming its vessels. The patriarch's journals were not just a map to the past, but a horrifying blueprint for their future. Was the entity, stirred by the deep-sea anomaly their cousin had discovered, now actively asserting its claim over its human hosts, drawing them, one by one, back to the lightless depths from which it had arisen? The mansion, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage, its walls reverberating with an ancient aquatic pulse. What terrifying metamorphosis was now underway within their very cells, a silent invasion echoing through generations? And what would it demand of them when the transformation was complete? The salt crust now through her patriarch's hand. The true horror of his Challenger Deep expedition began to manifest, not as a simple narrative, but as a chilling, unfolding premonition. His early entries spoke of triumphant descent, the crushing pressure a mere technical challenge, the darkness an invitation. The submersible, the abyssal herald, a vessel of human audacity, plunged into the deepest scar on Earth's face. Lights pierced the black, revealing ephemeral snows of organic detritus. Bioluminescent wonders, and then something else entirely. The journal shifted in tone, from meticulous scientific observation to fragmented, almost poetic horror. He described a distortion in the hydrophones first, a low thrumming, imperceptible at first, then growing into a resonant hum that vibrated through the very hull of the submersible. It was not a mechanical fault. It was a sound, ancient and profound, seemingly without origin, yet permeating the crushing silence of the deep. Then came the visual. Not a creature, not a geological formation, but an impossible geometry. He meticulously sketched, with trembling hand, structures that defied Euclidean principles, colossal and non-Euclidean, seemingly woven from shadows and the very pressure of the trench. They were not constructed. They simply were. As if the abyss itself had congealed into impossible forms. This was it. This was the moment. The contact was not a handshake across species, but an osmotic, sensory intrusion. The hum intensified, a symphony of archaic thought, a chorus of forgotten ages. It didn't speak in words, but in resonance, in a profound, inarticulate knowing that bypassed the auditory cortex and settled deep within the primal brain. It was a consciousness, vast and indifferent, stirring from aeons of slumber. What he felt was not fear in its conventional sense, but an overwhelming existential dread, the realization of a profound cosmic loneliness, coupled with an utterly alien presence. His notes, increasingly illegible, spoke of a lullaby of oblivion, a song of the primordial, and then a sudden piercing clarity, an image burnt into his mind of a colossal eye opening in the abyssal void. Not a physical eye, but a psychic aperture. He had not found a relic. He had become one, a conduit for something that had waited patiently in the dark. The abyssal herald, its name now a cruel irony, ascended, but it brought back more than samples and data. It carried a resonance, an echoing vibration of that first, terrifying communion. The very air in the Blackburn Manor, thick with maritime melancholy, seemed to still when these passages were read aloud, as if the ancient hum sought its resonance in the present. What unholy pact, unseen and unrecorded, had truly been forged in that silent, lightless realm? The patriarch, Elias Blackburn, returned from the abyss, not as a conquering hero of science, but as a man haunted, a silent vessel for an unspeakable truth. His triumphant return from the Challenger Deep was marred by an unsettling pallor, a distant gaze that seemed perpetually fixed on something beyond the horizon. He spoke little of the final days of his expedition, his official reports terse, almost evasive. Yet the family whispered. They observed the tremor in his hands, the sudden inexplicable chills that would seize him even in the warmth of the roaring hearth, and the way his eyes would dart towards the darkest corners of the manor at night, as if anticipating a formless, encroaching shadow. These were the first anomalies, subtle tremors in the fabric of their lives, easily dismissed as the natural aftershocks of an unprecedented journey into the planet's crushing maw. But they were not isolated incidents. The salt-worn manor itself seemed to register Elias's unspoken torment. The relentless fog, once a familiar comfort, now pressed against the windows with an almost predatory insistence, its mournful moan from the distant horn carrying a new unsettling quality, like a lament not for lost ships, but for lost souls. The tides, usually predictable in their ancient rhythm, began to behave erratically, pulling back with unusual ferocity to reveal stretches of seabed never before exposed, only to surge back with a violence that clawed at the foundations of the ancient docks. And among the usual detritus of the sea, strange, unidentifiable fragments began to wash ashore, barnacle-encrusted, unsettlingly organic, yet clearly not of any known terrestrial life. They were dismissed as geological oddities, or perhaps the fragments of some forgotten shipwreck, but the Blackburns felt the prickle of unease each time they found them. The curse in its nascent form was a creeping dread, not a sudden cataclysmic event. It began as a whisper in the blood, an inherited melancholia that settled upon the next generation. Elias's children, though outwardly healthy, found themselves plagued by a pervasive fatigue, a weariness that sleep could not touch. Their dreams became a labyrinth of echoing darkness and immense, unseen pressures, often culminating in the sensation of falling endlessly into an inky void. Migraines, sharp and debilitating, became common, often accompanied by the fleeting perception of geometric patterns that defied earthly symmetry. Swirling just beyond the edge of their vision, it was as if their minds, or perhaps their very cellular structure, were slowly being rewired, subtly resonating with a frequency not of this world. One of Elias's sons, a meticulous cartographer named Alastair, meticulously documented these peculiar family ailments and environmental shifts in a series of private journals, mirroring his father's own hidden record-keeping. Alastair, too, felt the pull of the deep, a profound, almost desperate longing to return to the very depths that had claimed a part of his father. He spoke of an internal compass, an inexplicable urge guiding him towards the ocean, particularly towards anomalies in the bathymetric maps that resembled the non-Euclidean structures his father had hinted at in fevered, whispered confessions. He believed these strange occurrences, both familial and environmental, were not coincidental, but were echoes, reverberations from an immense force, a debt demanding payment from the lineage. He began to notice patterns, correlations between the worsening of family symptoms and peculiar seismic events recorded thousands of miles away, deep beneath the Pacific. Could the tremors in their blood be linked to the rumblings in the Earth's abyssal crust? Were these just coincidences, or was their inheritance far more insidious? A direct biological link to the entity Elias had disturbed? What if the very fabric of their existence was slowly being rewritten by an alien will, a malevolent intelligence awakening from its aeons-long slumber in the deep? Stay with us, because what we are about to reveal may change your perception of the oceans forever. The chilling truth, echoing through the Blackburn family's decaying manor, finds its genesis not in some spectral apparition, but in the crushing, silent realm of the deep ocean. It was Alastair Blackburn, the family's intrepid patriarch, whose insatiable curiosity led him to tempt the unknown, charting a course into the very heart of the abyss decades ago. His ambition was monumental, his vessel, the Trench Seeker, a marvel of mid-20th century engineering. A fragile shell designed to withstand pressures that would liquefy steel, plunging into a darkness no human eye had ever pierced. For weeks, the trench seeker had navigated the alien landscape of the Challenger Deep, its hydrophones straining to capture any whisper from the void. The expedition, hailed as a triumph of human endeavor, soon transformed into a chilling descent into something far older than Earth itself. Alistair's logs, now brittle and salt-stained, speak of an unsettling silence broken only by the hum of his machinery, a silence that felt less like an absence of sound and more like a held breath. Then the anomaly. Not a geological feature, not a biological signature, but a colossal echo on the sonar, impossibly regular, almost geometric. What Alistair encountered defied every known principle of geology or biology. It was not merely a rock formation, nor a new species of abyssal creature. Instead, his camera feeds, grainy and distorted by the immense pressure, began to reveal outlines of a structure, vast and non-Euclidean, impossibly alien, emerging from the abyssal plain. This was no natural wonder. It was the chilling testament to an architecture not of this world, or at least, not of this era. A forgotten civilization's footprint, etched into the very mantle of the earth. His final, frantic entries detail the moment the trench seeker brushed against one of its protruding arms. That was when the relic was unseated, a fragment torn from the ancient edifice, brought to the surface. It was not gleaming gold or precious jewel, but a dull, obsidian-like shard, throbbing with a faint, internal luminescence that seemed to pulse with an unfathomable ancient rhythm. Alistair, ever the scientist, saw only an unprecedented discovery. But what he held was not merely an artifact. It was a key to a door that had remained sealed for eons, protecting humanity from an intelligence so profound, so primordial, that its awakening sent ripples through the very fabric of existence. The malevolent intelligence, long dormant, stirred, its ancient hunger reawakened by the patriarch's unwitting sacrilege. What truly returned with Alistair from the deepest dark? Not just a relic, but a bond, a curse woven into the very genetic code of his lineage, a debt that would span generations. Stay with us, because what we're about to reveal may change your perception of the oceans forever, and perhaps of the very nature of inheritance itself. The salt-laced air inside the Blackburn Manor, already heavy with the scent of damp decay, began to carry new, more unsettling notes. A faint, metallic tang, like old blood mixed with brine, permeated the dust-laden fabric of the ancestral home. It was subtle at first, dismissed as the house's age, or perhaps the encroaching sea, yet it clung to their tongues, a pervasive whisper of something deeply wrong, something dredged from an unimaginable antiquity. The phenomenon, long a theoretical dread, documented in their patriarch's fevered journals, was no longer confined to the abstract. It was seeping into their very reality, a malevolent stain spreading through the mundane, a palpable manifestation of the abyssal entity's reach. Amelia, the pragmatic eldest sister, found herself plagued by an escalating series of auditory anomalies. The relentless moan of the foghorn, an ever-present backdrop to their isolated existence, began to warp, distorting into an impossibly low thrumming, a rhythmic pulse that resonated not through the air, but directly within her bones. It was a sound that defied terrestrial origin. one that seemed to emanate from pressures no living thing was meant to withstand. A deep-sea chant of primordial hunger. These were not mere echoes. They were intrusions, piercing through the fragile membrane of their sanity, tearing at the very fabric of their waking consciousness. Then came the visions, not mere phantoms of exhaustion, but fleeting peripheral distortions that danced on the edge of perception. Shadows elongated into impossible geometries. Objects in the house seemed to subtly shift their configuration when not directly observed. And in the reflective surfaces, a momentary glimpse of something vast and ancient, swimming just behind their own tormented reflections, its form a terrifying non-Euclidean swirl. Elias, once the family's steadfast anchor in logic, began to suffer from an inexplicable, creeping physical deterioration. His skin, once robust, now took on an alarming translucence, revealing a network of veins that pulsed with an unnatural, almost bioluminescent glow, reminiscent of the alien life forms that drifted through the lightless zones of the ocean. A sickening echo of the deep's own strange beauty. His hands, especially, became delicate, almost ethereal, as if the very solidity of his being was being eroded by an unseen force. A molecular decay tracing its origins to the Mariana Trench itself. The family's collective sleep became a fractured landscape of shared terrifying dreams. Dreams of crushing pressure, of unimaginable cold, and of a colossal, non-Euclidean structure rising from a black seabed, accompanied by that same haunting, ancient hymn Amelia had begun to hear in her waking hours, now amplified, a siren song from the deep. The curse was no longer just a family legend, a dark inheritance. It was a biological predator, gnawing at their sanity, their flesh, their very genetic code. The journals, once a mere repository of a madman's ramblings, now became a horrifying premonition, chronicling their exact descent, detailing the insidious progression of a malady that defied medical science. What truly lay beneath this physical and psychological unraveling? Was it a disease, a haunting, or something far more ancient and terrifying? The silent deep reclaiming what it believed was its own, pulling them back into the forgotten abyss. Yet the patriarch's notes held far more than the mere musings of a man obsessed. Buried within the dense scientific prose, meticulously cross-referenced with biological diagrams and neurological schematics, lay the chilling record of a transformation. It was a slow, insidious erosion, beginning not with grand hallucinations, but with a subtle recalibration of the senses, a creeping distortion of reality from the inside out. He documented how the world began to taste of salt, not just on his tongue, but in the very air he breathed indoors, a pervasive ancient briny tang that defied open windows and the crisp Maine sea breeze. His eyes, once keen for microscopic detail, started to perceive a faint, pulsating luminescence in the deepest shadows, an ephemeral, living glow mirroring the alien bioluminescent organisms of the abyssal plane. What began as a mere anomaly, a curious physiological shift, rapidly devolved into an undeniable, horrifying reality, a direct physical link to the profound darkness he had disturbed. He meticulously charted the progression, unexplained internal tremors that mimicked the deep earth vibrations of a seismic event, a constant, low-frequency hum that vibrated in his very bones, too deep for the human ear to truly register, yet profoundly disquieting, and a creeping, marrow-deep chill that no amount of warmth could dispel. a cold that seemed to emanate not from the frigid Atlantic air, but from within his very core. His blood, he theorized, was undergoing a subtle yet profound alteration, a molecular echo of the crushing pressures and alien chemistry of the trench from which he had returned. Was his body becoming attuned, not to the terrestrial world he knew, but to the unfathomable, lightless depths? Was the curse not just a haunting of the mind, but a terrifying biological assimilation, a physical re-engineering? The journals became less a detached scientific record and more a desperate lament, the chronicle of a man detailing his own agonizing unraveling. He described how the pervasive salt taste intensified, morphing into the metallic tang of old blood and rusted iron, and the spectral luminescence coalesced into fleeting amorphous shapes at the periphery of his vision, forms that defied earthly geometry. These were not the familiar phantoms of a haunted mind, but echoes, he believed, of the entity's true form, glimpses filtered through a compromised, invaded neural network. He wrote of his desperate struggle to maintain scientific objectivity, even as his own sanity fractured under the relentless weight of these insidious internal invasions. His once unyielding scientific rigor, once a shield against the unknown, now became a horrifying magnifying glass for his own torment. The most terrifying entries spoke of a deeper, more fundamental change, not merely physical decay, but an insidious shift in his very essence, a transformation from man to something else. He began to perceive himself not as an individual, but as a vessel, a living conduit for something ancient and vast, something that whispered from the absolute dark. The bloodline, he posited with trembling hand, was not simply inheriting a malady, but a horrifying mandate. The Blackburn family, through his reckless actions, had become an anchor, a living tether between the familiar world of light and the forgotten, consuming abyss. And the deepest terror, the final chilling revelation. He believed the entity was not merely retrieving a lost artifact. It was retrieving something within their very biology, a forgotten key, an encoded map, passed down unknowingly through generations, etched into their very DNA. What horrifying ancient purpose could such a profoundly disturbing biological inheritance serve for an abyssal intelligence, stirring from aeons of slumber? The relentless tide of the curse continued its advance, eroding the very foundations of the Blackburn family's existence. What began as a creeping dread, a shadow in their peripheral vision, had escalated into a tangible, suffocating weight. Eleanor, the eldest remaining Blackburn, once meticulous in her research, now found her own mind becoming a treacherous landscape. Her nights were haunted by a rhythmic grinding sound, no longer dismissed as the house settling or the foghorn's moan, but a distinct biological thrumming, a heartbeat echoing from an unimaginable depth. This wasn't merely psychological strain, it was primal, invasive. The family archives, long avoided, spoke of similar afflictions in generations past. The seasickness of the mind, as one ancestor recorded in a ciphered diary from the mid-19th century, during a period of unexplained disappearances along the Maine coast. Coincidence? Or the same malevolence stretching across centuries? Captain Theron Blackburn's journals offered a chilling answer, or perhaps a further descent into unreality. He detailed not just visions, but a profound sense of being observed, a presence pressing against his thoughts like abyssal pressure. Theron spoke of a peculiar resonance, a frequency not audible but felt, a low hum that induced waking dreams, blurring perception and hallucination. He documented how this hum synchronized with the lunar cycle, reaching its zenith during spring tides, as if the ocean's strongest pole was a conduit for something ancient reaching out. Eleanor, armed with this knowledge, noted the same cyclical intensity in her own decaying sanity. Her vision blurred, colors shifted, and the manor's air momentarily crystallized into the frigid blackness of the abyssal plain. She described her bones shifting, an internal reshaping, as if her genetic code was subtly rewritten, harmonizing with an alien blueprint. Could the curse truly be biological assimilation, an insidious transformation into something utterly other? What was the ultimate form of this monstrous metamorphosis, and was it merely physical corruption, or a horrifying prelude to a mind's complete surrender to the silent, unfathomable deep? The crushing weight of the abyssal plain, a pressure beyond human comprehension, defines the frontier where our world ends and something else begins. It was into this realm that Phineas Blackburn, patriarch of a cursed line, ventured decades ago. His submersibles, primitive by today's standards, were frail cocoons against an unimaginable force, yet they pierced the veil of the known, descending into the Marianas, chasing whispers of geological anomalies and forgotten biological forms. He wasn't searching for monsters, but for answers, for the very origins of life in the deepest, darkest crucible of Earth. What he found was not life as we understand it, but an echo of something far older, a silence so profound it vibrated with an unheard hum. His logs, retrieved only recently from a sealed sea chest in the Blackburn Manor's deepest cellar, speak not of triumph, but of a creeping dread that solidified with every meter of descent. Phineas meticulously documented the shift in the hydrophones, the subtle distortion of familiar frequencies, replaced by an alien cacophony that seemed to resonate within his very bones. It was a sound that defied physics, a non-Euclidean melody sung by the void itself. Then, the first visual, not through a viewport, for the light could not penetrate such depths, but through sonar, imaging systems struggling to render the impossible. A structure, vast beyond measure, not geological, but architectural, stretching across the abyssal floor, defying known geometry. Its facets reflected no light, absorbing it, a blackness within blackness. This was not a natural formation. It was built. And then the contact. Phineas recorded a surge, a violent shuddering of his vessel. Not an impact, but something far more insidious, a permeation. He described it as a cold seeping into the very metal, a biological chill that bypassed insulation, a consciousness that touched his own. Was it the guardian the legends speak of? Or was it the relic itself, radiating an ancient malevolence? He spoke of a fleeting vision, an ancient eye, immense and unblinking, peering into his soul, leaving an indelible mark. It was not a physical wound, but a psychic incision, a gateway opened. This was the moment the debt was etched, not just in memory, but in the very essence of the Blackburn bloodline. His return was not a triumph, but a carrying of the contagion, a fragment of the abyss brought back to haunt the surface world. Are you ready to truly grasp the nature of this insidious inheritance? Stay with us, because what we are about to reveal may change your perception of the oceans forever. The ocean, in its vastness, can hide almost anything. But even the deepest dark... These were the first anomalies, the barely perceptible tremors of a world beginning to shift, hinting at a presence long dormant, now stirring. Imagine, if you will, the mid-20th century, a time of burgeoning deep-sea exploration. Scientific instruments, ever more sensitive, began to register data that defied easy explanation. Deep beneath the Pacific, where the Earth's crust buckles and groans, hydrophones designed to track submarines started picking up something else entirely. Not the familiar song of whales, nor the rumble of tectonic plates, but rhythmic pulsations, too uniform for nature, too vast for any known technology. They were dismissed as geological resonance, a peculiarity of the ocean floor. Yet in retrospect, they pulsed with an unnerving consistency, almost like a colossal heart beating beneath miles of crushing water. Was this the distant drum of an awakening? A slow, steady pulse emanating from the abyssal plains? Then there were the visual reports, often fleeting, from early deep-sea submersibles and remote probes. Unprecedented bioluminescent blooms, not the scattered lights of plankton, but coherent, vast patterns of light emerging from trenches previously thought barren, glowing with an impossible, almost intelligent luminescence. Some researchers spoke of fleeting glimpses of colossal, non-Euclidean structures, not geological formations, but impossible geometries that seemed to shift and reform under the pressure, defying all known physics. These sightings were often attributed to equipment malfunction or the crushing psychological effects of extreme isolation, the mind playing tricks in the alien dark. Yet, the consistency of the descriptions across disparate missions suggested something far more concrete, far more disturbing. And what of the anomalous migrations? Deep-sea creatures, rarely seen and almost universally adapted to specific pressure zones, began appearing in shallower waters, sometimes dead on distant shores, sometimes sighted in feeding grounds, thousands of miles from their known habitats. These creatures, often ancient and primal in their form, occasionally bore strange symmetrical markings, patterns that seemed etched rather than natural, hinting at an interaction with something beyond human comprehension. The scientific community scrambled for explanations: climate change, shifting currents, disease. But no single theory accounted for the breadth and the strangeness of these occurrences, the sudden, desperate upheaval in the deep-sea ecosystem. These weren't isolated incidents. They were a mosaic of anomalies, scattered across the global oceans, each dismissed in its time as an outlier, a data error, or an act of nature. But when viewed through the lens of the Blackburn family's curse, a terrifying pattern begins to emerge. What if these seemingly disconnected events were not mere coincidences, not just nature's random quirks, but the first stirrings of something vast? What if the initial tremor, the faint whisper, was the deep drawing its first breath after millennia of slumber, exhaling an ancient, forgotten influence back into the world? The ocean, in its indifference, had begun to bleed the subtle signs of its deepest, most terrifying secret. Are you ready to dive deeper into the whispers that become roars? Stay with us, because what we are about to reveal may change your perception of the oceans forever. The tattered edges of the patriarch's journal held more than just faded ink and brittle paper. They whispered of a secret history, a chronological anomaly that defied the accepted timelines of human exploration. Among the frantic, scribbled entries detailing the Mariana Trench expedition, the surviving Blackburns discovered a set of references, almost an afterthought, pointing to an obscure maritime archive in Boston. It was a footnote in a life consumed by the deep. Yet it proved to be a festering wound in the fabric of their understanding. Within the dusty a captain's log, penned in a careful, spidery hand from the early 19th century, spoke of a strange phenomenon off the coast of Maine, not far from their own blighted manor. The log detailed an unusual deep-sea catch, something not of this world, pulled from waters previously thought barren. It was described as a calcified, non-Euclidean fragment, pulsating with a faint, internal luminescence. The description was chillingly similar to the relic their patriarch had supposedly found in the Pacific's deepest void. Could it be another piece or an earlier manifestation? The captain, a man named Elias Thorne, documented a subsequent series of inexplicable deaths among his crew, each victim displaying the same rapid, physical decay now afflicting the Blackburn lineage. His final entry, scrawled in obvious terror, spoke of a silent, watchful hunger emanating from the depths, a malevolent presence drawn to the fragment, demanding its return. Thorne then vanished, his ship found adrift and empty, swallowed by the same mists that eternally shroud the Blackburn estate. This wasn't merely coincidence. This was a pattern, a recurring echo across generations. The implication was staggering. The curse was not born with their patriarch's expedition, but merely reawakened by it. It had lain dormant, perhaps for centuries, only stirring when certain conditions were met, or when a piece of its ancient architecture, its relics, were disturbed. The Thorne family, it was discovered through genealogical records, had intermarried with the Blackburns generations ago. A chilling, direct bloodline connection. The inheritable decay was not an anomaly, but a signature, a brand upon a lineage marked by forbidden knowledge. This realization offered a terrifying shift in perspective. Their ancestor had not been the first to disturb the ancient pact. He had simply been the latest to trigger its retribution. The entity's hunger was not new, its demands not recent. It had waited, patient and insatiably patient, for the right moment. For the descendants of those who had once touched its domain to be within its grasp. The question was no longer if they could escape, but how many times this ancient horror had risen to reclaim what was lost, and how many other families had silently withered under its suffocating weight. What other forgotten histories did the abyss hold, ready to resurface and claim its due? The salt-laden air of the manor, once merely a metaphor for the family's decaying legacy, began to thicken, growing heavy with something far more tangible than memory. The creeping dread that had haunted generations of Blackburns, a phantom limb of an ancient curse, was now undeniably manifesting. Its spectral touch had finally found solid ground, claiming its first direct victim in recent memory, dragging a living soul into the abyssal maw. Alara, the youngest Blackburn, a marine biologist whose intellect shone like a beacon even in the family's somber lineage, had vanished. Her research vessel, a small, privately funded submersible, was found adrift, hundreds of miles off the coast of a newly charted Pacific anomaly. The silence aboard was deafening, a void where scientific hums and human voices should have been. Yet it wasn't truly empty. What remained were her final, fragmented log entries, a chilling testament to her final moments, a chronicle of discovery turning to despair. They spoke not of a natural phenomenon, but of something alien, something impossible. Her voice, digital and distorted, echoed from the data drives recovered from the wreckage. a voice teetering on the precipice of madness and awe. She described, with an almost frantic precision, the emergence of a colossal, non-Euclidean structure. Not something built, but something grown, impossibly vast, defying all known architectural principles. It ascended from the abyssal plain, a jagged, dark silhouette against the ephemeral glow of bioluminescent life, its angles shifting, contradicting perspective, challenging the very geometry of existence. This was no sunken city, no natural rock formation. It was a wound in reality, a tear in the fabric of the deep. And then the sound. Her hydrophones, designed to capture the whisper of deep-sea currents or the clicks of unseen leviathans, had recorded something else entirely. A haunting ancient hymn. Not a song, but a resonance. A vibration that seemed to bypass the eardrums, reaching directly into the mind, pulling at the very fibers of consciousness. It was a melody of profound age, carrying within it the immense pressure of forgotten aeons, the cold indifference of the deepest ocean, and an unspeakable hunger. This wasn't a vocalization. It was a pulse, a call, a summons from a source that predated human understanding. This bizarre discovery, preserved in Alara's final logs, shattered the last vestiges of doubt for the remaining Blackburns. The curse was no longer a legacy of madness, but a living, breathing entity, its tendrils reaching up from the darkness. The structure, the hymn, they were not just anomalies, they were invitations, or perhaps demands. This phenomenon, which had consumed Ilara, confirmed their darkest fears. Their lineage was indeed biologically linked to the entity their ancestor had disturbed. The payment was due, and the abyss was calling, not just for artifacts, but for souls. What terrifying purpose did this ancient, impossible architecture serve? And why was its ancient song now resonating through the cold, silent depths? The pages of Elias Blackburn's final journal, unearthed from a hidden compartment within the salt-warped floorboards of the manor's abandoned observatory, were not merely a record of a doomed expedition. They were a testament to a mind slowly unraveling under the weight of an unthinkable discovery. His frantic scrawls, often dissolving into indecipherable symbols and diagrams that defied Euclidean geometry, hinted at a horror far more intimate than a beast from the abyss. The Blackburns, huddled around the flickering light of an oil lamp, their faces pale with dread, pieced together a revelation that twisted their lineage into a living, breathing testament to cosmic dread. What Elias had stumbled upon in the Mariana Trench was not a simple artifact, but a fractured segment of an intelligence, a shard of consciousness encased in a structure that pulsed with a faint internal light. This was the relic they had so desperately sought. But Elias's notes indicated something far more sinister, a parasitic fusion. He believed, in his final delirious entries, that the relic, upon exposure to atmospheric pressure and human contact, had not just been found, but had imprinted itself, not upon the submersibles, nor the equipment, but upon him. A transfer, insidious and unseen, of some vital, dark essence into his very being, a bioluminescent seed of the abyssal guardian itself. This was the horrific truth behind their hydrobiological curse. The explanation for the decay, the hallucinations, the gnawing dread that fed upon their genetic code. The entity was not merely hunting them from without. It resided within, a dark, inheritable passenger, consuming them from the inside. The ancient hymn their youngest had heard before vanishing was not a call for help, nor a warning, but a resonating frequency, a silent telepathic summons from the progenitor entity attempting to reintegrate its lost, living fragment. Their bodies were becoming the conduit, the anchor point for a reunion millennia in the making. Elias's final, almost illegible entry, written in what appeared to be his own blood, spoke of a pact, a millennia-old arrangement, he theorized, not between man and deep, but between itself and another, forgotten intelligence. A pact to seal away a fragment of its power, to prevent its full awakening, using living vessels as a temporary, decaying prison. The relic, then, was not just a key, but a living, decaying lock, and the Blackburn line was its unwilling custodian. What crime had their forebear committed, truly? Not merely disturbing a slumber, but perhaps inadvertently breaking the seals of an ancient, terrifying binding ritual. The foghorn wailed, a mournful lament across the barren peninsula, mirroring the realization settling over the dwindling Blackburns. They were not just fighting for their lives, but for their very essence. A desperate struggle against an ancient will that sought to reclaim its own scattered pieces. What becomes of a bloodline when it is no longer its own, but a living echo of the deep? The insidious nature of the curse, once dismissed as mere folklore or the ravings of a broken mind, began to manifest with chilling precision. The family's genetic inheritance, once a source of pride for its academic prowess, became a prison. The symptoms, initially subtle, a pervasive fatigue, a heightened sensitivity to cold, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor in the hands, escalated with each passing generation. The patriarch's journals, painstakingly deciphered by the remaining Blackburns, revealed not just a historical account, but a medical diary of his own slow, horrifying decline, mirroring the very afflictions now consuming his descendants. He spoke of an internal chill that no fire could quell, of visions of impossible geometries shimmering at the edges of his sight, and the curse, it became horrifyingly clear, was not merely an attack, but a reabsorption. The artifact, so long sought and feared, was not a hidden treasure to be unearthed, but a blueprint, a piece of something greater that the Blackburn lineage unknowingly carried within their very cellular structure. The ancient pact, mentioned in fragmented whispers by the patriarch, was not a treaty signed in ink, but an unspoken covenant with the primordial deep. A delicate balance maintained for millennia between the surface world and that crushing unseen realm. The patriarch's intrusion, his unwitting awakening of the abyssal guardian, had not merely broken this pact, it had torn a fundamental fabric of existence. The youngest Blackburn's final logs, recovered from the ghost ship near the Pacific anomaly, suddenly took on a new, horrifying context. Her descriptions of the colossal, non-Euclidean structure emerging from the abyssal plane were no longer just geological observations. They were visions, glimpses of the entity's true form, or perhaps its vast, living infrastructure, and the haunting, ancient hymn reverberating through the hydrophones. It was not a call for help, but a song of reclamation, a resonant frequency designed to activate the dormant genetic markers within the Blackburns, drawing them back to their origin. The entity was not hunting them for an external relic, but for the very essence of itself that had been carried forth, unknowingly, in their bloodline. The true horror lay in this realization. They were not merely victims of a malevolent force, but unwitting hosts. Their deterioration was not a punishment, but a transformation, a forced metamorphosis back into something ancient, something that belonged to the trench. The whispers they heard, the impossible visions they saw, the physical decay that eroded their humanity, these were the entity's tendrils, slowly pulling them back into the primordial soup from which it believed they had stolen a piece of itself. How does one fight an enemy that defines your very genetic code? An opponent whose victory means not death, but a terrifying, complete reintegration. Stay with us, because what we are about to reveal may change your perception of the oceans forever. The Patriarch's feverish entries, once dismissed as ramblings, now converged with a forgotten branch of oceanographic theory. This fringe discipline posited a biophysical memory within the Earth's deep crust, speaking of abyssal nodes, points of immense pressure and inexplicable energy fluctuations, acting as conduits to something far older than humanity. Blackburn had not merely stumbled upon a relic. He had activated one of these nodes, a millennia-dormant gateway. His meticulous calculations, mirroring ancient myths of deep-sea civilizations, alongside precise hydroacoustic data, now revealed a living resonance, a hum emanating from the trench that was not merely sound, but a language. This was the specialist's grim realization. The entity communicated through a resonant vibration, a hydrobiological curse. This forgotten science, re-examined through the terrifying lens of the Blackburn family's suffering, unveiled a chilling truth. Ancient cultures, from the Rapa Nui to the isolated Inuit tribes, had oral histories of oceanic titans emerging not from the surface, but from the deepest chasms, bringing with them a form of madness or decay that mirrored the Blackburn's symptoms. These were not external spirits. They were indigenous to the deepest earth, reawakened by human intrusion, hungry for what they perceived as a return to balance. The Blackburn Manor, a decrepit sentinel against the churning Maine coast, had become the singular focus of this reawakened hunger. Its very stones, infused with generations of their bloodline, now vibrated with a sickening pulse. The air, thick with brine and decay, shimmered with unseen pressures. The hallucinations, once confined to their waking minds, began to manifest physically. Shadows coiling in peripheral vision, the relentless moan of the foghorn twisting into an ancient abyssal hymn. The artifact that the entity so desperately sought to reclaim was not a tangible object to be found in a dusty chest. It was a biological inheritance, a genetic imprint left by their patriarch's violation, a deep-seated connection woven into the very fabric of their DNA. The curse was not merely a hex or a haunting. It was the entity's desperate attempt to reabsorb this biological conduit, to reclaim its lost fragment, to finally silence the echo of human intrusion. The final confrontation was not with a monster in the dark, but with an inherited decay, an insatiable hunger that gnawed at their sanity, twisting their perception of reality. The remaining Blackburns, weakened and haunted, faced an adversary that attacked their very essence, aiming to dissolve their consciousness into the vast, indifferent consciousness of the deep. Their struggle was against the crushing weight of the forgotten abyss itself, pressing down, seeking to reclaim what was disturbed. Stay with us, as the true nature of the abyssal hunger finally reveals itself. The fog never truly lifted from the coast of Maine. It clings there still, a perpetual shroud over the salt-worn manor, whispering secrets the tide cannot wash away. The Blackburns, those who remained, did not escape their inherited legacy. The youngest, the brilliant marine biologist, never returned from the abyssal depths where the colossal, non-Euclidean structure had emerged. Her final log entries, fragmented and chilling, became the last coherent records. Her siblings, driven by desperation and the creeping decay in their blood, continued their ancestors' work, not for knowledge, but in a desperate, futile attempt at absolution. They sought to understand the millennia-old pact, to sever the biological tether to the abyssal entity that gnawed at their essence. Their journals, discovered years later amidst the manor's decaying grandeur, speak of a final, horrifying descent, not into the ocean, but into the maelstrom of their own minds, plagued by terrifying hallucinations and the ceaseless ancient hymn that echoed from the deep. The last entry, scrawled by a hand trembling with fear, described a moment of terrifying clarity, a vision of the forgotten artifact reclaimed, not by them, but by the very intelligence that had pursued them through generations. It spoke of a symbiotic horror, a bond forged in the crushing darkness of the Mariana Trench, an entity that had merely reasserted its ancient claim. There was no escape, only a return to the silent, suffocating embrace of its ancestral home. The manor stands empty now, its windows like vacant eyes staring out at a perpetually gray sea, a monument to a lineage consumed by a horror too ancient, too profound to comprehend. The unidentifiable, barnacle-encrusted fragments still wash ashore, whispering of things dragged from unimaginable depths, eternal reminders of a truth humanity was never meant to discover. Their story, a chilling testament to humanity's hubris and the terrifying resilience of the deep, forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. What else lies dormant beneath the crushing pressures, beyond our light, patiently awaiting its moment to stir? Are these merely forgotten creatures, or something far more sentient, far more ancient than our definitions of life allow? The Blackburn curse was not a curse, but a debt, a cosmic repayment for a profound violation committed by one man whose unyielding curiosity unwittingly disturbed a millennia-old pact between humankind and the silent, unfathomable deep. It was a lament, echoing through generations, for a history violently disturbed, a primal balance irrevocably shattered. The deep ocean remains Earth's last true frontier, a vast, unexplored realm where the rules of our known world might simply cease to apply, where the veil between understanding and the incomprehensible is impossibly thin. And within its lightless abysses, perhaps, the answers to our most terrifying questions already exist, waiting for us to dare to look. But are we truly ready for what might stare back? If this journey into the forgotten abyss, into the chilling legacy of the Blackburns, has stirred your curiosity, if the questions we've posed echo in your mind, then join us on this ongoing quest for truth. Like and subscribe to the Unspoken Sea for more journeys into the profound mysteries that lie just beyond the edge of our perception. The search for truth never ends, and ours is just beginning.